So this is a pretty interesting article. So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Sajid Javid warning against returning to austerity. And so for those of you who don't know what austerity is, I guess it's important to define it. So austerity, difficult economic conditions created by government measures to reduce public expenditure. So essentially, what it's aimed to do really is just cut public spending as much as possible. And oftentimes it does come with tax increases depending on who the person is. And so what Javid's comments are really interesting because he's very pro business but still anti welfare. Oh, it's not directly anti welfare, but we can tell what he means by this is very pro business from kind of the things he said and the things he said in the past. And so let's dig into this. So former Chancellor Sajid Javid warned against return to austerity as the UK struggles with the effects of the coronavirus. In a report by the Centre for Policy Studies, he also called for low taxes shock on businesses to aid the UK's recovery. The Conservative think tank, which was co-founded by Margaret Thatcher, said this should be based on a dynamic private sector and low taxes. And so Thatcher, being a person who pushed austerity during her time as Prime Minister, so it's very interesting for him to use this language. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said there will be no return to austerity because people don't like that word, so he's going to replace it with like another word, probably saying we'll be financially responsible. However, Labour said the government should have offered a more generous support during the crisis. I mean, probably should have done. Maybe a UBI would have been a good idea, but at the same time, what they did do is help a lot of working people who found themselves out of work, who were on furlough. Somehow they didn't help people who were already out of work. The report by the Tory think tank said that a quick economic bounce back from the coronavirus is unlikely. Is unlikely, so it's doubly unlikely according to the BBC. But it said coronavirus emergency spending measures should be stopped if possible by April 21, which I don't think that's possible. Given that this thing will be around until a vaccine is there, so I don't know what these people are talking about. It said that polls suggest that the UK is not ready to return to austerity measures introduced by former Chancellor George Osborne, necessary though they were. So here he's saying, in a economic crisis which arguably in some ways is worse than the 2008 crisis, he's saying don't go back to austerity, but when the Conservative Party came in 2010, it was necessary. So why was it necessary then but not necessary now? This is something they need to ask Javid. Is it because you can pin all the spending cuts on Labour for the last time, but you can't do it this time? Big man. It's despicable that he's justifying austerity in the 2010s, but he can't justify it now in the 2020s. It's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. Some mental gymnastics going on. Some mental jiu-jitsu going on here. Instead, the report calls for tax to shift away from profits and incomes and towards reformed property tax and tightening tax reliefs, which unduly favour the wealthy. I mean, this should have been done already. So, I mean, the property tax thing, I need to see more. I need to do more reading on that one. But with the tightening tax evaders and stuff, this should have been done a long time ago. If you guys were serious about this, you would have done this whilst you were Chancellor, but you didn't. National insurance should be given a significant temporary reduction to make it cheaper for employers to take on staff. Hang on now, national insurance is one of the things that goes to public services, so no, it shouldn't be cut because we still need them. Optimistic hopes. Mr. Javid, who resigned from the Treasury in February, said early hopes for a V-shaped recovery has proven optimistic. So that's when the economy dips and jumps straight back up. He predicted that some long-term damage to the economy had become unavoidable, with 2.5 million people out of work due to COVID lockdown. But to speed up the rate of people re-entering employment, Mr. Javid argued in the virus report published on Tuesday that ministers must make it easier for businesses to hire workers. If we want to support and stimulate the economy, then axiomatically, that's a big word for you, man. The best option is to cut payroll tax. That's a common Conservative thing to do, is cut payroll taxes. Tax employment less, and all things being equal, you end up with more of it. Businesses will only hire people when they need to. Cutting their tax and stuff will help, but if they don't need to hire more people, they won't do it. So there's that one, Javid. Other recommendations made temporary cutting VAT and bringing forward shovel-ready infrastructure projects, with Mr. Javid arguing the only way out of this crisis is growth. So it's kind of like kind of like, I guess, a more of a Keynesian argument of, invest in projects that will go straight into the economy, things like infrastructure. That's a good one. But him also advocating for tax cuts. So I don't know where that would fall under Keynesian economics, especially one as regressive as VAT. So that's an interesting one. I don't know where they stand on that one. He follows former Chancellor Alistair Darling in calling for an emergency VAT tax cut. But the thing is, we know that in 2008, or in the when the Labour government cut VAT, it didn't really help because the companies just kept the profits. They just kept the money. So cutting VAT might not be the best thing to do, but I suppose it will help a lot of small businesses as well as big ones, huge ones. And so maybe it is the right thing to do, because I remember my man Jeff owns a comic book shop, where he was talking about, one guy was like, oh, you must make loads of money from selling like these, I think it was like a Daredevil statue, and Jeff was like, no, because I've got to pay VAT when I buy it and when I sell it, and that's 20%. It's really high. So cutting VAT would help, but I think there are other ways of helping smaller businesses. So yeah. Mr. Javid said, if we want to secure the strongest possible economic recovery, it's essential to leave no stone unturned, working 25 hours a day, 10 days a week. The Labour Party, in a report in March, said the economic effects of the coronavirus criticised the government for acting too slowly, and said it should underwrite a bigger proportion of wages for those who lose their jobs. So if we look at Sajid Javid properly, the austerity he's against is the austerity of business taxes and business spending. Essentially, he wants the government to invest more in spending when it comes to helping out businesses, but he won't do that to help actual people. And there's the difference there. He wants austerity that will impact poor people, but he doesn't want it that will impact businesses. And so if we jump to this article here, Javid also highlighted another crisis, that the identity of the Tory party. Is true that the UK currently faces a severe housing shortage, with the number of homes being built falling far short of 200,000 target, which is generally recommended by housing experts. However, Javid's insistence that the Conservative government could easily borrow more money reinforces the notion that austerity was no more than an ideological experiment rather than an economic necessity. So what we can tell from this is Javid is okay with borrowing money to boost the economy in these respects, but he will not. He refuses to help poorer people, and that will be shown in his voting record. So here, he launches an ad to cut red tape. So he's very, very, very pro-business, to the point where he will borrow money, which goes against the Conservative ideology of kind of aiming for surpluses in order to help businesses. And so if we go to the final piece, before we look at his voting record, we can see that Javid has said, we must slash corporation taxes and burn regulations to improve conditions for small, medium size businesses, and obviously large businesses, because large businesses are hampered massively by health and safety as well, or as Boris Johnson say, health and safety, because he's that guy. And so this is when Javid was a private investor in small businesses, blah blah blah. And so what we can tell from this is that Javid is extremely pro business, but where does he stand on poor people? Let's have a look. So this is Javid's voting record. So we can see Javid's voting on social rights. We can see his voting on foreign policy. Voted against investigation into the Iraq War, shock. And so if we look at his voting record on welfare and benefits, and then we can compare it to his ideology on taxes. So let's have a look. So Javid voted on welfare, so he almost always voted for reducing housing benefit, deemed the bedroom tax, consistently voted against raising welfare, at least in line with prices, consistently voted against paying the higher benefits over long periods for those unable to work due to illness or disability. So he voted against giving more money to disabled people and people who are sick. Alright, sick one, Javid. Almost always voted for making local councils responsible for helping those in financial need afford their council tax and reduce the amount of spending on such support. So he's saying to the council, you help them, it's not our responsibility. Consistently voted for reduction in spending on welfare benefits. Almost always voted spending public money to create jobs for young people who have spent a long time unemployed. So he voted against, not just helping people that are poor, but also he also voted against helping younger people get guaranteed jobs so they can actually get experience working, which will help them long term. So you can see Javid's a bit of a scumbag. But if we actually look at his voting record when it comes to things like taxation, employment, almost always voted for raising the tax threshold, which people start paying income tax. That's a good thing. Almost always voted for increasing of VAT. Hang on, Javid, mate. But I thought you were against things like business rates and things like that. So why did you vote to increase the rate of VAT? He don't make sense. He don't make sense. Almost always voted for higher tax on alcoholic drinks. Almost consistently voted high for taxes on plane tickets, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Voted for a mixture of tax on fuel motors. Almost always voted against increasing the tax applied to income over 150,000. So he'll happily help these people out. When it comes to helping poorer people, nah. He did increase minimum wage, which does help poorer people, but at the same time, he won't help people who are out of work. That's the main problem here. That's the austerity he's for, not helping these people. And so we've got some more. Consistently voted for encouraging occupational pensions. So that's people who are, I think that's about people who are old, who are pensioners, who also work at the same time. We don't have any information to calculate Javid's position on automatic enrollment. Almost always voted against a banker's bonus tax. So the people who crash the economy, he's against them getting their bonuses taxed. Voted for a mixture of higher taxes on banks. Almost always voted against an annual tax on expensive homes known as the mansion tax. So in one piece, he argues for a tax on housing. Almost always voted for allowing employees to exchange some employment rights for shares. That's a dodgy thing. Almost always voted for restrict regulations of trade union activity. Typical conservatives are typically against trade unions, and generally voted for reducing capital gains tax. And so what we can see from his rhetoric and his record is the fact that the kind of austerity, well, his voting record's a bit mixed when it comes to certain taxes on businesses. What we can tell is he is very much against helping poorer people that are specifically out of work. He does help some poorer people in work with things like increasing the tax threshold and increasing the minimum wage, but he would hit them in other ways by stopping them getting things like in-work benefits. So what we can tell from Mr. Javid is the kind of austerity, so it's very disingenuous to put he's against austerity. What he's against is anti-business spending from the government, where he wants the government to increase spending and reduce taxes and reduce regulations on businesses, but he's against helping workers. And that's what we can tell from Javid's record. So this article is very disingenuous, where it talks about austerity. So what it should really say is something like, former Chancellor warns against increasing business rates or business regulations, or things that hamper business. That's what it should kind of say, I guess. And so shame on the BBC, whoever wrote this piece. It's just very disingenuous. And so, look, you can tell by the fact that, look, it's Thatcher, he's part of the Thatcher think tank. He's got that mentality of, things like scrapping trade unions, helping big businesses, helping out businesses when it comes to dealing with workers and things like that. So look, I'm going to leave it there. This video's rambled on long enough. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.